Mark Donald. I was in seminary with one of your pastors, the one that's not Grant. So I've known Lindeen for a long time and just consider her a good friend as well as Grant. So it's always nice to be invited back. And this time especially, it sounds like her procedure went well and it was good news. And so we obviously give thanks for that. And I'm here more in a kind of pulpit supply role than a Christikon role. But at the same time, I'm here for that too. I've been director of Christikon for 10 years. I've been connected with camp for 35. So when I was a snot-nosed college kid back in the 1980s, I went to one of our fine Lutheran colleges, Gustavus Adolphus College, and during the summers after that, I worked up at camp, and now kind of come full circle. I get to run the place and screw it up in my own special way, right? So, anybody not familiar with Christikon? I'm making some assumptions here. A lot of times when I do this, I have to explain where we are and what the thing's like. You guys kind of know life in this part of the world, right, and understand where we are, so I don't need to do that. I'm just going to share with you a little bit about this summer in particular. I've done a little bit of writing about it. If you read some of the things, if you're on our junk mail list, you may be hearing some things before. But it was an excellent summer. It was a really unusual summer. And so I'm just going to share with you a few things. I've got a picture up here. Any idea when I might have taken this picture? This is of the camp meadow. Hint, it was not last week. June. Almost. Memorial Day Monday. Did you guys get weather here? Do you remember this Memorial Day Monday? You might have been too low. We're at 6,500 feet, and I think anything above about 6,000 feet got snow. And snow to the tune of 2.5 feet of snow on Memorial Day Monday. So that is May 28th, 29th, something like that, okay? We sometimes will get snow in June up there, but usually it's a couple inches. I had almost 60 people up for our work weekend, and it was the Monday. It started on the Sunday. It snowed hard all night. By Monday morning, the meadow looked like this, and the roof, that was already once we shoveled it off. We had put this thing up on the Saturday of Memorial Day work weekend because we leave it off for the winter because otherwise the snow will barrel it over. We had so much snow up there, we had to get up there before it barreled it over because we were using that to help heat the building. I'm looking at that chimney there. This was one of my staff folks from the summer, so you can kind of just get a sense of how hard it was snowing then. And this was one of our guests. And if you can see, I don't know how clear it is back there, but the snow is up to the bottom of his car. He has an Outback, which is a fairly capable vehicle. That thing was going nowhere. This was heavy, wet snow, and the second that you stepped on it or drove on it, it just turned to ice and just, you know, that heavy kind of sloshy stuff that you can't get through. If you can see, there are cars here, here, and here. These are our upper parking spots. There were 15 cars up here. Every single one was stuck. Okay? So this was the day that all of my staff were due to arrive, and I called as many as I could and said, I don't care where you are, if you have to stop in Beach, North Dakota, do not drive up to camp because you won't make it. Some of our staff had come up for the Memorial Day weekend, but over half of them were en route. About 9 of them stayed at Big Timber Lutheran Church, just like about 3 days ago when a bunch of people were staying in Big Timber because the highway was closed, okay? And a bunch of them stayed just wherever they were. Some stayed actually in town here with a former staffer that lives here. So that was the introduction. So we had to pull all of these cars out, and then our driveway, if you've ever been up there, snakes down a little bit. I had 3 cars slide off just trying to go down the driveway because the second they put on the brakes, that turned to ice, and they slid off, and so we had to pull them out. And the only way we could pull them out, we had a long rope, and we had about 15 guests, mostly staff and other folks, and we would just take and pull them, and then swing them so they were pointed downhill. And a group of about 15 cars got lined up at the bottom of our gate down there, and they slowly drove out. My wife was one of those. So, I am not the smartest person in the world. But I figured on any given summer in my last 10, there is usually one thing that happens during the summer that is absolutely unpredicted. And so I thought, stupidly, as you'll find out in a second, oh, here's our thing for the summer. Anybody remember what happened 2 weeks after that? This was the middle of June, June 14th to be specific. Did you get any high water? Yeah, do you remember what happened in the Paradise Valley? Remember what happened in the north entrance to the park? Red Lodge, okay? We were part of that. All of the snow, we had 2.5 feet here, and we're at 6,500 feet. On the lake plateau, which is 9,000 feet plus, there was upwards of 5 feet. Okay? Some of that melted off in a couple of weeks, but 2 weeks after that, this is what the water was starting to look like. We got, from a Saturday or a Sunday to a Monday, June 14th, 15th, if my dates serve, it started raining. And it rained for 25 hours straight. And it wasn't so cats and dogs rain that you couldn't see, but it was a hard, steady rain, and it rained for 25 hours. And my rain gauge after 25 hours showed 5 inches of rain. That's more rain than I get in a typical summer. And that all came at once. And that all melted that snow anywhere it was around there. And so I have a friend who's a meteorologist, and he said it was estimated that for any square foot of land up there, there were upwards of 12 inches of precipitation that was in that square foot. And that all went downhill. And that all went into the river. Remember how I said I had already had my thing for the season?
Yeah, no.
Yeah, little did I know, right? So, here is what the Boulder River looks like. Now I'm going to show you one more slide just to give you a sense of a comparison. This is what it normally looks like in the spring. Okay, so here it is again. See how muddy and brown that is and how much higher? If you look on the sideline, you'll notice that this is our normal high water. Just for comparison, this is what it typically looks like in August. So this is my son. He had his senior pictures taken a number of years ago. The water was probably 4 or 5 feet above his head. Okay? Alec is 6 feet 4. Granted, he was sitting there, but he was kind of perched up on a rock. So that water was flying. And there we were. I was standing on this bridge, so just so you know, Christikon is up here, okay, and the road goes, and I was standing on this bridge, and I could hear boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And what that was were those big rocks, the ones that my son was sitting on, being thrown around in the water. It was so noisy, it sounded like somebody was bowling down there. My dogs wouldn't go anywhere near the water. They just dug in, and they're like, no way, right? They didn't even want to be on the bridge, okay? It absolutely reshaped the river. So we lost about 60 feet or so of our river frontage we own all the way down to the river, and we're down on the other side, kind of near the Hicks Park side of our camp. The river kind of flows like this, and it cut out about 60 feet of frontage and almost went up to our road. And that happened in about 2 days. Okay. They closed the canyon for 5 days. I had to cancel our camp for developmentally disabled folks. And for 2 weeks, so starting then, they opened the canyon back up, but for 2 weeks they closed any of the hiking trails. One of the things we do at Christikon is hike. And so I had my first junior high camp and confirmation camp, and we usually send them out on overnights. And so their overnight, they went down into our meadow and they camped there. And when they needed to get water, they walked up to the bathhouse, or if they needed to use the bathhouse, they walked up there, right? And when they were done cooking, they went up and they rinsed their dishes off. So they were able to have an overnight, but they did so in our meadow. They closed the canyon to hiking mainly because, it was high enough so the water didn't affect the trails, but they didn't want folks to be caught up there, because if that happened, they would have to pull 6 or 8 people off, to get to search and rescue, and those people wouldn't be available to help out in places like Red Lodge or Gardner or what have you. Okay? So this was the first 2 weeks of our summer season. And I thought, okay, we've had an extra thing this summer. Again, I'm not that smart. So there's the pictures. Anybody familiar with these little devices? Have you ever seen one before? It's called a Garmin inReach. It's a little radio, and so it's got a number of different features. You can see it has a screen on it, and it's good. We send these with all of our trails groups. They're not cheap. They're about $500 a pop, and I have one for each of my trails groups, so 7 of them, plus a kind of yearly subscription. And usually what we can do with those is we can communicate with the groups, no matter where they are, just to say, okay, here's where we are, we made our campsite, or things are going well, but we came short because our group wasn't able to make it up there, or what have you, right? I can see on a big screen where they are, but there is a little button right here. I don't know if you can read this. Anybody read what that says?
SOS.
SOS, all right? On these buttons, there is an SOS feature, and so it's one of those God forbid kind of things, okay? If something happens and you're in the backcountry and you need help and you need it right now, you punch that button. We've had these for almost 5 years. We've never had to use that. Again, they're nice ways to communicate with groups. They have a little map feature on there. They've got a little weather thing they can check to see, like if they're climbing a peak, if there's rain or stuff expected. For the first time, since we've had those, we had to punch the SOS button. And here's what happened. We send out groups on any one of 6 different loops, okay? And so the loop kind of goes around, and where this happened was at the absolute furthest point away from camp, because that's when things like this happen, right? So they are a 2-day hike away. They are up the Lake Plateau, and they were climbing a peak called Chalice Peak, which is close to 11,000 feet. Beautiful, beautiful spot. You can see for miles. The group's up at the top, and so this happened at the very top of the peak. One of the gals came up, and she was allergic to peanuts and peanut butter. And we knew that going in, and so we said, that's fine. We said, are you allergic to like proximity? So if you're eating peanut butter and I'm here, I would still get sick, or is it more if you ingest it? No, just if you ingest it. Okay, so we'll make sure that we don't have you eat peanut butter, and we send it with the rest of the group. What it turns out is the gal who had the illness didn't realize, and found out 2 days hike out at the top of Chalice Peak, that it was more than just ingesting peanut butter. Someone had touched the peanut butter container and then had inadvertently touched her arm. And that was all it took for her to start going into an anaphylactic reaction. If you're familiar with anaphylaxis, your tongue swells up, it becomes very hard to breathe. It can be a dangerous situation really quickly. She had been an anaphylactic reaction before, but not for a long time, but she recognized it. And so while they're up on the peak, she goes up to her staff person and she says, I'm having trouble breathing. And our staff people know the health history of their folks, and so immediately our staff person goes, okay. And it started getting worse, and it was getting worse pretty quickly. And so he calls the other staff person, and they start figuring out, and they go into their training. Okay? In an 11-week summer, we train our staff for 3. And part of our training is certifying them in wilderness first aid and in CPR. I've got my camp physician who is, she's a physician in Hardin, and has been on search and rescue teams and is very familiar with the backcountry. And her husband, who is a paramedic, they come up and they train in scenarios just like this. What would you do if you were a long ways away from camp and this happened? So they start getting things figured out. They realize that she's not able to breathe, and then they get what's called an EpiPen, an epinephrine pen. They jam it into her leg, they punch the thing, and she starts feeling better. And then they kind of watch her. And this is going on over the course of about 10 minutes from when she said she wasn't feeling well. So it progressed pretty rapidly. After about 10 or 15 minutes or so, she's not able to breathe again. It starts swelling up. This is a bad reaction. So they flip the little switch and they push SOS. And when they do that, here's what happened. That button bypasses me and everybody else, and it connects to Garmin's emergency center, wherever that is in the world, probably somewhere in the States, okay? Within about a minute or so, they had a message on that device saying, we got your SOS notification, we have your GPS coordinates, what's happening? And they punched in anaphylaxis. And that was all the Garmin folks needed to know. They scrambled, based on the GPS coordinates, the help flight out of Billings. They scrambled the search and rescue out of Big Timber or Sweetgrass County. And then I get the call. So this bypasses me entirely. That all is going, and then I get a call saying, this device at these coordinates had the SOS punch, they said it's anaphylaxis, and you've got a helicopter en route. Right? It's amazing technology, stuff that I never, ever want to use again. But I am so thankful that we had it. An hour and 5 minutes after they punched SOS, the helicopter is hovering overhead from Billings. 2.5 hours from the onset of her symptoms, from her going up to her counselor and saying, I'm having trouble breathing, she is landing on the rooftop of Billings Clinic Hospital. It is unbelievable. And I don't know, I'm not a physician, and I don't have enough medical training to say that it saved her life, but we had to hit her twice with epinephrine. And after you do that, especially the first time, and especially when it's starting to get worse, that's not a good thing. So she was flown in, she was stabilized overnight, and her group kind of continued on with the rest of their trails trip. Are you keeping count of how many unusual things I'm having during the year? Where are we right now?
5.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I almost got to that. We're at 3.
3 big
okay?
ones.
And stupidly, because I just don't learn, and I tempt fate, and I keep knocking on wood, right? Okay, this had to be our thing for this summer. One more. This is Rose Caplet. Rose Caplet is from Bozeman, was from Bozeman. Rose died at Christikon this summer. So remember the developmentally disabled camp that I was supposed to have in June that got canceled because of, yes, all the fun, right? We have folks that come to that developmentally disabled camp and have been coming, some of them for over 40 years. Rose was 40 years old. She came from the first day, we say that they're to be adults, and so when she was 18, so for 22 years in a row, she had been coming up to our DD camp. And when we had to call in June and tell our 50-some folks that we were having to cancel the season, I didn't have to make those calls. My secretary, Carrie, who's in our Billings office, did. But she said that was the most heartbreaking day I have ever had. Because one after another, their family, or if she was talking with them, they just broke into tears. Rose sent us a letter in the middle of the summer saying, I hope that we can still have camp. She said, I've been packed since March. And this is a camp that is for a population that has very few opportunities once they reach 18. There's a lot of things for them when they are young, but once they get to be 18, other than Special Olympics and maybe a couple of other programs, there are very few opportunities they have to be able to come up, and especially to come up to a camp setting like this. It's important in so many ways, not only for them, but also for our staff. And so we figured out a way to wedge this in at the end of the season. Rose got dropped off at the bus in Big Timber. She wasn't feeling very well, wasn't sure she wanted to go. Her mom was really wondering. She'd kind of had some other underlying health things, but finally she decided to go, and she got on the bus. And she rode up, and our buses pulled up. And it's hard to describe. It's 2 buses full of our developmentally disabled folks, and when they get off, it's always chaos whenever the buses come up, no matter who's on them, because they get off and they're just everywhere, and you're herding cats and trying to find them and put them with their counselors, get them to their cabin. Even more so in this camp. We have a mountain of luggage, and not everybody knows whose is what, right? Rose stayed on the bus because she told one of the bus attendants, she said, I'm just not feeling well, can I rest here for a little bit? You betcha. And so we're getting everybody ready to go, and I would check in on Rose, and about half hour later, her counselor came on. Her name was Bella. Bella had been her counselor for 4 years in a row, and when Rose saw her, her face just lit up, and she was so excited to be there. And then Bella had to go and check on some of her other cabin folks, and so our nurse and the bus attendant stayed with Rose, and I walked in to check and just say, how are you doing, Rose? And she looked at me and she kind of smiled, and then her eyes just rolled back in her head. And she slumped over. And she went into full cardiac arrest. We did CPR for over an hour. We had called 911, but in this case there wasn't a help flight available, and so the ambulance started. It took the ambulance 2.5 hours to get up to us from Big Timber. It took the sheriff an hour and 10 minutes, and he was driving a big Dodge pickup truck, right? It's bumpy going up to us. Finally, after an hour, I have an EMT on my staff that summer. I had a nursing student, and we realized that Rose was gone. This is 3 days before the end of the season. Mm-hmm. And I also had 50-some other DD folks that we had to provide camp for. So we were in the midst of transitioning and trying to help them to come to grips with things. I've never done CPR on a living person before, and I've never used a defibrillator before, right? But it just, the underlying health consequences, well, that was just that. Hmm. So on the surface, snow, rain, enough to build the ark, if you will, anaphylaxis, a camper died. It would seem like the summer was just an abject failure, that the summer was just a wash, and that it's one that we just want to put away and not think about or talk about again. And yet, in the midst of all that was going on, there were some other things that were going on as well. This was my staff from last summer. 29 exceptional folks, almost all college age or recent graduates from all parts of the states. Some were former staff, some were brand new. Exceptional. They brought it to our guests time and again. The Christikon experience, this message of you are welcome here, period. This intentional Christian community. And they got to live it for 11 weeks. That's the women on staff. There's the men. We're a scruffy looking bunch, but we can dress at least somewhat nice on occasion. Here was some of the training that we did at the beginning of the summer. Worship went on this summer, and other programming in our main lodge. Worship went on, and other programming went up at our main campfire site, and that was one of our junior high sessions. We did things like play games in our meadow. Groups went out on trails for the week. They did dishes for the whole community. They engaged in Bible study and formal and informal conversation on the porch of the deck or way past lights out at night. They heard in as many different ways as we could tell them, again, you are welcome here. You are known and loved and cherished and forgiven and redeemed and sent out by this God we know through Jesus Christ. Lives were changed this week. And this is what the parking lot looks like, minus 2.5 feet of snow. And on any given week, either at the beginning or the end of the week, I mean, it looks like a used van sale up here. We've got all kinds of vehicles. There are typically 2 big buses that pull in as well. And we either welcome folks in, or at the end of the week, we kind of have to get them back on the bus, right, because they don't want to go, okay? And so all kinds of ministry happened. 800 plus guests came up over the course of the summer. That's usually what I have to work with. My staff smile for about 30 seconds, and then they turn into that for the most part. But there you go. And I guess I show you this combination of pictures and I tell you those stories to say that yes, this summer was challenging. And yet at the same time, powerful ministry happened this summer. The light shone even in the darkness of death of a camper, or a serious reaction, or natural forces beyond our control that altered the shape of the season. And I can't help but wonder, if we think about it, maybe we might make those same claims as well. That regardless of what's going on in your life, or our life, in the life of the congregation, or the Gallatin Valley, or the state, or our union or our world in the midst of war and heartbreak and grief and illness and whatever else, God remains at work. And God's at work in ways that both help carry us when we can't carry ourselves, and also with eyes to see and ears to hear, we might even dare to be people of hope and look for the ways that God is working powerfully, even in the midst of great difficulty. Sometimes it's only going to come in hindsight, right? Where you'll see God at work. But maybe even in the midst of things that are difficult, we might have that sense now. So that's kind of a horse and pony show. It's a little bit of a report for the summer. We're going on to our 73rd year as a camp. Started in 1951. I am in the midst of recruiting, so for the last couple of weeks I've been in such fabulous places as Fargo-Moorhead, Minnesota. I know you're jealous, I can just see it on your faces. Last week I was at our one of our Lutheran colleges in Indiana called Valparaiso University. In the next coming weeks I go to our other Lutheran schools in the Midwest, Gustavus and St. Olaf and Luther College. I go out to PLU in Washington. I might be at California Lutheran, various spots, and I'm recruiting staff to be on the group for the year. The other exciting news is that for the first time in Christikon's history, we are ready to put out word for a full-time assistant director. And that is going to be someone who is going to assist me in duties ranging from helping with some of this recruiting travel, so I don't have to go to all of those places I just listed. Maybe they can go to Concordia in January. It's fabulous there in January. Right? And maybe I'll go to California Lutheran because I am not quite as dumb as I look, okay? But they'll also help just with the recruiting of staff, the training of staff, the running of program over the summer, the connections, especially with our ownership congregations in this part of the world, and it'll free me up to do some different things, including connecting with folks that use us in different spots. We're really excited about that, and you'll probably see some news if you're on our social media sites or if you see some of the junk mail that we send your way. But we're hopeful that either in the spring or maybe in the fall, depending on scheduling, we'll have somebody on board with that. I was able to I got a gift from an individual that covered salary and benefits for that person for 5 years. It was a $350,000 gift, and we will be close to $70,000 when you figure in salary and a benefit package and some, expenses for travel and other things. Which we'll probably, look for someone a few years older than my staff. It will be like a good entry into full-time outdoor ministry work. And we really come in a competitive way because of that gift. And so we're super thankful for that. And then we trust as we keep going through those years that position will start to be more self-sustaining, right? So a lot of exciting things happening there. I remain thankful to serve there and thankful for connections with congregations such as yours. So that's it. Any questions or things you're wondering about or other stuff I can tell you? Otherwise, short and sweet and to the point. Yes, sir.
How did you help your staff process this summer? Any one of those events would be extraordinary.
Yeah.
All of them put together.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
That was a lot.
That's a lot to process.
Yeah. The hard thing about especially losing Rose is it happened, as I said, 3 days before the end of the season, and we kind of jammed it in and manipulated the last couple of days to make that camp work. So basically, the DD camp finished up on a Thursday morning, and once we got cleaned up, my staff left Thursday afternoon, right? So we had precious little time to debrief as a group, so we went around and I caught everybody individually. We had some friends of the camp, so Pastor Lindsay in Livingston? Melissa, thank you. Yep, I'm confusing her with another person I know. Anyway, Pastor Melissa came up and just said, I'm not even asking, I'm just coming up. I'm bringing snacks for your staff and I'm just going to be here. And she ended up just hanging out with some of the DD folks so some of my staff could just get 10 minutes away because it's a very labor-intensive camp. And for some of them, in particular the ones that were involved in the direct resuscitation efforts, that took some processing with them. Pastor Darren and his wife Trudy. Darren and Trudy both work for St. John's within Ministries and Billings. They just came up for the day. That was a gift of St. John's. And yeah, we just processed the best we could with kind of in those 3 days and just kind of let them feel. But we also said, you know, we've got guests here and we can't just drop everything and cry for 2 days. Own it for a few minutes and then we need to go back out. And so they showed remarkable resilience. And I guess it was similar, what I told them when I was able to get them together was, you probably remember where you were on 9/11, right, 2001. And at that point, I had a brand new baby and a toddler who was about 2 years old, okay? And I just remember watching that go on, and yes, you grieve that and you wondered, what on earth is this going to mean? And you tried to process it, and at the same time, I had to feed my kids lunch. And I had to, at that point I was in seminary, I had to go to school, my wife had to go to work, and so I said, you have to be able to feel it and also still function, because that's just what it means to be an adult. Some of my kids said, I'm really not very interested in being an adult, if that's what this means, right? And I said, yeah, I can understand that. So it was a hard lesson to learn, but at the same time, we did it as carefully as we could at the time that we had. So, yeah, a lot of prayer. We also got, you guys are great. You sent us a card signed by a lot of your leadership and other folks just saying, we're thinking about you, praying for you. I put out a message on our social media page just because we were in desperate need of prayer, especially on that Monday, Tuesday, as we were trying to do this camp. I bet I got 1,500 responses just on our camp Facebook page. Dear God, I'm so sorry, we're keeping you in prayer, right? All these different ways, and so we could see how the larger community was holding us up and helping carrying us when we were really hurting. So, truck driving school sounded really good this fall. I tell you what, I'm like, holy smokes, if this is how the summers are going to go. Somebody said to me, and if anybody says it here, I might throw something at you, said, well, you had 4 things you should be free and clear this summer, and it's just like, don't say that, right? We don't need to tempt the gods, yeah, but no, we, you know, again, in the midst of a lot of challenging things, it was a really good and strong summer, and so we were so very thankful for that, so, yeah. Any other questions or things I can answer for you? Well, like I say, if you hear nothing else from me, I hope you hear this. Thank you. Thank you. I know you guys support us so generously, both individually and as a congregation, and so we are deeply appreciative of that, and it's a real pleasure to be with you. So I'll have more for you in a little while here. You know, I get paid by the word, and so I'm about halfway through, right? But no, I look forward to being with you in worship, and you know, I'll be around if you have other questions and you want to just chat informally. So. God bless you. Thank you for the time. And yeah, we'll see you in a few minutes.
Thanks.
Thanks.